thank you all very much for having me here. Hopefully any second here we'll see something on the screen. Hey, it works. All right. Always a pleasure when it works. So the first thing I'd just like to ask all of you is that there are, I don't want to say controversial, but certainly some different concepts that I'll be presenting. There's well over 30 of us here, and as most of you might remember from Statistics 101, you've got 30 people randomly selected. If we all participate, you'll be at an over 90% confidence interval. So if I could just ask you, I'll be asking you some simple questions. They'll just be about yourself. You all know the answers. But if you could just kind of put your hand up if the answer is yes, or don't put your hand up if the answer is no, and then look around the room, you'll be able to prove to yourself whether what I'm talking about is valid or whether it isn't, right? So I've noticed certainly in places like China, a bit here in India, that some folks are a little shy or a little reticent about that. But this is really just so that you guys can take a look around and see whether it's true for other people, not just for yourself. But mostly what I do is I talk about what's happened to you. And the first thing I'd like to just ask you to think about is, what's the most dangerous thing you have ever done? Now, I doubt it was this, trying to set a world record unsecured 290 meters above the ground. I know this guy, not super well, but he lives very close to us, 45-minute drive from where I live. Now, as you're watching it, and I realize it's pretty scary, but do try to think about yourself. What's the most dangerous thing, or what are the two most dangerous things you have ever done? Yeah, I mean, now, I got into this behavior-based safety business just over 30 years ago in Canada with one of the oldest behavior-based safety processes on the market. And, you know, I was really young, which I wouldn't recommend to people. You know, I was 28 years old, going out and talking to people my dad's age about their behavior at steel mills and sawmills, refineries and oil rigs. And of course, they're all just looking at me going, "Oh, tell me all about it there, sunshine." Now, just leave the slides on, please. Okay. But they did give me some, they did give me some training. They showed me the old risk matrix. Everybody here familiar with this? Let's try that again. Everybody here familiar with this? Thank you. Okay, it makes perfect sense though, right? So the probability of severity goes up and the probability of occurrence goes up. The whole idea is we can't operate up in the red because it's too dangerous. And then they told me that this was primarily what industrial safety was all about. People deliberately violating the rules, procedures, or personal protective equipment standards. You guys, maybe we could just do both screens with the slides if you can. I don't know if you can or not, but but people deliberately violating the rules, procedures, personal protective equipment standards, like this guy here on the forklift who's not wearing his steel-toed work boots. But then I got out there in the field in Fort McMurray, the tar sand operations, and this was the kind of stuff that I started seeing. And I mean, unless you really didn't like the guy in the pickup truck, it's pretty hard for me to imagine there was any willful, deliberate intent going on here. So what I quickly started realizing as I got out into the real world, not the theoretical world, was that the worst injuries and incidents seemed to be coming from where people had become the most complacent, not when they were actually doing the most dangerous things. So, what about you? What is the most dangerous thing you've ever done? I mean, I've been skiing since I've been 4 years old, used to race, used to teach, so I love skiing, double black diamond runs. But in the summer, I like to go hiking. And when I was living in Los Angeles, I went hiking up Griffith Park with a couple friends of mine. And if you look at it from the ground, it doesn't look that steep or anything. And I am not a mountain climber, just a hiker. But as we got about 2/3 of the way up the hill, it started to get steeper, or as they would say, more technical, which is just a fancy term for if you make a mistake, you're going to die. And it had to hold one hand hold here. Where would you put your foot? Where would you grab the other hand? Okay, over here next. And I got to this ledge where I had to jump about this high to get to the next ledge. Now, I played basketball in high school, college, one brief year for Canada, so this 6-inch jump was nothing for me. And I can still remember my legs just like shaking. I mean, if I go back to the moment, I can usually get the hair in my arms to kind of stand up. I mean, obviously I made it, I'm here. But there was no way when we got to the top that I was going back down, not a chance. So that meant we had to walk all the way around the back of the mountain through the bushes. Now, I wasn't exactly sure what poison oak looked like, but I was pretty sure that these bushes were poison oak. And by the time I got to the dermatologist, he told me this was the worst case of poison oak he had ever seen in his career. I had rash like all over me, all over my face. And what I did for a job down there in Los Angeles is I was a photo model, doing commercials, magazines, fashion magazines, and soap operas and things like that. So I couldn't work for 3 weeks. So not only was this the most dangerous thing I ever did, this was also super expensive. And back then, starving actor, I wasn't making a lot of money. So being out of work for 3 weeks was really touch and go back then, right? So what about you? What's the most dangerous thing that you have ever done? Now, as you watch this video, I bet you didn't do this, base jumping, but see if you can see me in the video.
3, 2, 1, Happy New Year.
Now, it's Braden Dean. He teaches SafeStart for us at high schools and polytechnic institutes in northern Alberta, Keano College, up in Fort McMurray. And as you can imagine, when he shows the kids his videos and he lays the parachute out on the table, his cool factor with the kids just goes through the roof, right? But did you see me in that video? I doubt it, because I am like against the back ledge like this. Because ever since I climbed up Griffith Park, I have been scared to death of heights. Now, I can ski down anything, but if I have to climb up it, there's not a chance. But what about you? I mean, maybe it was mountain biking down the steepest hill, maybe it was windsurfing, hand gliding, or scuba diving, but not just any old scuba diving. Like scuba diving where, all of a sudden you saw a couple sharks, and then you looked over and realized you were bleeding. Now, I don't want to say when were you the most scared, because a lot of audiences in North America are like, I've never been scared. I'm like, okay then, just the most dangerous, right? But what's the most dangerous thing you've ever done? Now, for a lot of people, it would be driving your two-wheeler or your motorcycle at really excessive speed, or driving your car at really excessive speed. But everybody got it? The most dangerous thing, two most dangerous things you've ever done? Okay, now, this is easy. What's the worst injury you've ever had, or what are the two worst injuries you've ever had? And then the last question, please put your hand up if you have a match. In other words, your worst injury came from the most dangerous thing you've ever done. Your second worst injury came from the second most dangerous. Your third most dangerous injury caused your third worst injury. Or even if you have a match within those top two or top three, please put your hand up. Okay, one. I've done this in front of 2,500 people at the National Safety Council. We had 4 hands in the air. So, even though this makes perfect intuitive sense, if you're talking about process safety or wire ropes, the wire rope doesn't care if it breaks, but the people do. And as soon as it starts to get more dangerous, people start paying more attention. So how much does paying attention, or how much does not paying attention in the moment, change the risk of the situation? Because if this was actually accurate, every one of us should have had our hands up. But instead, what you actually see, statistically, not just this group of people, is that the majority of serious injuries and fatalities are actually in the middle. There's 1,000 electrocutions in Canada and the United States every year. Only 100 of them are at high voltage. And we only use 115 volts in Canada and the United States. I mean, you've got to work at it a bit to electrocute yourself on 115. 900 fatalities in the United States last year, people falling from heights. 15,000 people died slipping and falling, not from the same level. Now, most unfortunately, 3 weeks ago Monday, I was up in the North Sea at a company that does maintenance on a big wind farm in the North Sea. And on Saturday, the session was on Monday, on Saturday, a man fell off a truck this high, hit his head, and died. So we had to open up the leadership session with a minute of silence for this man and his family. And there's no way you're going to make anybody wear a fall arrest harness when it's only 4.5 feet high. So, I've been waiting for years to be able to show you guys this video. This is the best example I can give you of the most dangerous thing not equaling the worst injury, because I got to see the Calgary 1988 Winter Olympics. I'm Canadian. So here he is, Eddie the Eagle. And if you all got a SafeStart card, as you're watching this video, I'd like you to see if you can actually pick out the states and the critical errors that caused Eddie's injury.
Hi, I'm Mike Legend. But we might know you better as Eddie Eagle. And this is my SafeStart story. Eddie the Eagle Ellis.
Eddie takes himself seriously even if nobody else does. The fans love him for all the wrong reasons. His lack of money, trainer, kids and facilities. He was a great British loser. All the care of bubbling incompetence somehow epitomized by the
but I landed it and I didn't get hurt. However, a few years ago, my wife wanted to go to a car boot sale. I didn't want to go. We argued about it, I lost, we went to this car boot sale. And she was looking around and she found this beautiful snail rocking horse. It's like a rocking horse, but it's in the shape of a snail. And it was for the kids, obviously, and we had 2 little kids, and she thought it would be great for the girls. So we argued about it, I lost again, we bought it. And I had to carry this snail rocking horse, not only out of this car boot, but I had to carry it across the car park and put it into my boot of my car. And it was really embarrassing. So I opened the boot of my car, I started to put it in, and it was a bit awkward. And it kept getting snagged on this and that. And I decided the mood that I was in, I would give it one big shove. And the moment I shoved, I felt this enormous pain in my eye. There was a candelabra in the boot of my car. And shoving, this candelabra went smack straight into my left eye. Didn't even have time to blink. And it pushed my eyeball right into the back of my socket. Oh, the pain was awful. Massive great black eye.
Hey, are you Eddie the Eagle? What happened to your eye?
It's a long story, but we should see the other guy.
And it did clear up after a month or so. But it could have been so much worse. If I'd have pushed even harder, my eyeball could have exploded or just burst. Well, I could have lost the sight in my left eye completely forever. And it seems so ironic that I jumped the 90-metre at the Calgary Winter Olympics and landed fine. And then I nearly lose my eye at a car boot sale.
Okay, so which of those 3 cards is filled out correctly? A, B, or C? Give you 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1. All right, how many of you said A? Okay, couple. How many of you said B? You were so close. How many of you said C? C is the correct answer. Those of you who said C, well done, well done. Now, speaking at a conference in Berlin a couple weeks ago, after the thing in the North Sea, and at the end of the talk, I was just sitting down listening to some of the other presenters, and I just happened, there was one empty seat at the back. I sat beside this lady, and she said, I really enjoyed your talk, but she said it made me so sad, especially that Eddie the Eagle video. And I was like, well, I mean, you know, it's kind of, I don't know why, I said. She said, oh, when my son was 4 years old, he was running with a stick, not a sharp stick. He fell, the stick hit a rock, it hit him in the eye, only it did squash his eye out. So he's been blind in his eye since he's been 4 years old. So a little bit harder, and Eddie would have luckily lost his eye, and then it wouldn't have been kind of an interesting and upbeat story. It would have been tragic. And that's so often the difference, eh? Just a little bit of luck. Anyhow, what causes the majority of serious injuries and fatalities is not intuitive. But that actually makes sense. I mean, think about it. If getting hurt seriously was really easy to figure out, how many thousand years ago do you think your ancestors would have quit getting hurt? Because breaking a bone hurts, burning your hand in the campfire hurts, standing up and banging your head on the top of the cave if you were a caveman hurts. So if they all could have figured it out, they would have. But your great-grandmother got hurt, and your great-great-grandmother got hurt, and so did your great-great-grandfather. And all of them would have quit getting hurt if they could have figured it out. But it isn't making perfect sense like that proverbial risk pyramid, okay? I mean, the risk matrix. So what do we really know for sure? We know that nobody was ever trying to get hurt. And that's why I got this picture in Russia. I was speaking at a conference there in April, and I just love this picture because if this guy here really wanted to get hurt, he wouldn't ask the other guy to hold him. And if the guy holding him really wanted him to get hurt, it'd be pretty easy. Just let go. So like I said, I really like this picture, but Russia, it seems, is almost the opposite of India. I mean, in India, I really think they ought to change the slogan. You know, I know it says India, it's incredible, but they really ought to change it to land of a billion smiles. I mean, everywhere I go in this country, everybody just lights up. You go to Russia, the whole country looks like they've got a toothache. You go to India, everybody's smiling. It's amazing. It's amazing. But anyhow, we know that nobody was ever trying to get seriously hurt, even if they were deliberately increasing the risk of the situation, which means that nobody would ever plan to have a serious workplace injury, which means that something unexpected had to happen. But not everybody sort of figured out that essentially there are really only three sources of unexpected events. Either you do something unexpectedly, the other person does something unexpectedly, or the equipment breaks or malfunctions and it does something unexpectedly. Now, it takes more than something unexpected happening for someone to get hurt. In order for someone to get hurt, you'd have to have at least one source of danger or potentially hazardous energy somewhere. But a lot of safety professionals in Canada and the United States and some in Europe get caught up with the concept of a hazard, something that's inherently dangerous, like a flame or a toxic chemical. And if you ask them to go out and inspect a bridge on the motorway and you say, is that bridge a hazard? They will go out and they'll look at the bridge, and if there's nothing wrong with it, they'll say no. And you say, yeah, well, what if you hit it at 100 kilometers an hour on your two-wheeler or your motorcycle? And they say, oh, well, then it could kill you. So it isn't just hazard, it's potentially hazardous energy, which includes kinetic energy, which means that if the people are moving, what else tells them what they could be moving into other than their eyes or their mind? I mean, can you imagine you're driving with somebody, you look over at them, and they got their eyes closed, and you're like, what are you doing? And they say, don't worry, I can smell it. Bridge up ahead. I mean, maybe your dog could smell the bridge up ahead, but I doubt if you could. So as people, we rely almost totally on our eyes and our minds to keep us from getting hurt when we're moving, right? Now, you'd obviously need to have a person involved for an injury. That would be eyes not on task right there, sir. And like I said before, something unplanned or unexpected always has to enter the equation. That, you know, and where you end up on the old risk pyramid after that chain reaction now is just a matter of luck combined with the overall amount of hazardous energy you're dealing with. I mean, normally a 1 meter fall is better than a 10 meter fall, and normally landing on your feet is better than landing on your head, right? But you weren't trying to lose your balance, traction, or grip in the first place. So the obvious and the best thing to do, if you can, would be to eliminate or minimize the hazardous energy. And that's what we've been doing in industrial safety for years and years and years. But you can't always get everybody to slow down to 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, and I don't care how good your engineering is, you can't minimize the gravity. So you can't always eliminate or minimize the hazardous energy, which leaves you with the person and something unexpected happening. So I'm going to show you this clip, see if you can figure out which of the three sources of unexpected initiated this accident. parking gate really didn't do anything unexpectedly. It did exactly what it was designed to do, and the lady might have been a distraction, but he pulled right into the line of fire without thinking about it. So I don't get too many arguments about the three sources of unexpected, although every now and again in the Midwest somebody will say, where would you put farm animals? But we're not using a lot of farm animals in the workplace anymore. But you start getting people to think about what are the percentages. What percentage of all total accidental acute injuries, on or off the job, because I know you were never trying to get hurt anywhere, what percentage are caused by the equipment breaking or failing unexpectedly? What percentage are caused by the other guy, and then what being left over in the self area? You will get all kinds of different perspectives, even with safety professionals. So what I started doing back in 1992 is I started getting people to build their own personal risk pyramids, because that way we could deal with what we knew for sure. See, the problem with reports, incident reports, or police reports, is we don't know whether the guy actually fell asleep at the wheel or whether a dog, a deer, a kangaroo, a cow, I've heard that. I've even heard crocodile ran out in front of him. And we don't know if what he told the police officer was the God's honest truth. But we sure as heck know whether a dog, deer, kangaroo, or cow ran out in front of us, or whether we fell asleep at the wheel. So I started getting people to think about their serious injuries: broken bones, torn ligaments, dislocations, concussions, comas, third-degree burns, ruptured spleens, punctured lungs, crushed tailbones. And I'd ask them how many of those have they had so far this lifetime, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or 10 plus. And then I'd ask them about stitches, sprains, and strains, or what we tend to call recordable injuries. And I'd ask him whether it was 5 to 10, 11 to 15, or 15 plus. And the average for 125,000 people that I've talked to in the last 25 years, it was 3 to 7 serious major injuries, 8 to 12 minor serious injuries. But when you start asking people, how many cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes have you sustained so far this lifetime? How many times have you banged your shin and said, ow, or worse? Most adults will say, if they're just thinking about their adult life, they'll say hundreds. But if you get them thinking about the first 10 years of their life, pretty quickly they start to conclude that it's thousands. Because most little kids are getting hurt, accidental pain, somewhere around 10 to 20 times a week. But you'd still also have to count all the things that happen to you as an adult, like banging your shin, stubbing your toe, dropping something on your foot, falling down the stairs or falling up the stairs, which is even more embarrassing, not seeing a stop sign or a red light, falling asleep at the wheel, turning or bumping into something, or standing up and banging your head, hitting your hand with a hammer, cutting yourself with a knife, scissors, or razor, burning your hand, arm, or wrist in the kitchen, spraining an ankle, knee, wrist, or thumb, straining your back, neck, or shoulder, falling into or onto something hard or sharp. I mean, most adults have had every one of those injuries so far this lifetime. And if you think about banging your shin or stubbing your toe, my guess is you couldn't even begin to count how many times you've done that in your whole lifetime. So most adults, when they start thinking about their whole life, including their childhood, will freely admit that it's somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. So just thinking about the serious injuries, because those are really the only ones you can remember, unless maybe you slammed your finger in a car door yesterday or something. Just thinking about your serious injuries. How many of you folks here have been seriously hurt, or like I used to say, stitches or worse? How many of you folks here have been seriously hurt because the equipment or the car you were driving broke or malfunctioned? In other words, the wire rope snapped, the hose burst, the seal failed, the traffic lights started working incorrectly. Okay. Normally, a room this size, you'd have a couple hands in the air. Normally, for 100 people, you'll get about 2 to 3 hands up in the air for that question. Now, for the other guy, you can't include sports where the other guy is not supposed to be trying to hurt you deliberately, but might be. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have referees in football, right? Now, in American football, you are definitely, or hockey in Canada, you are definitely trying to hurt the other guy. So those aren't accidental injuries. So not including sports injuries where the other guy might intentionally be trying to hurt you. How many of you folks here have been seriously hurt because the other guy did something unexpectedly? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, normally you now get about 10 to 15 hands in the air per 100. Any of you guys who just had your hands in the air, do you actually have more than one example, though, of being seriously hurt by the other guy? Because that normally you got to have about 500 people in the room for that one. Okay, now, last question. How many of you here besides me have been seriously hurt at least once in the self area? Okay, so all the rest of you didn't put your hands up. It was farm animals, right? Do you know what I mean? Not everybody here too keen, a little shy, right? There's only so many options here, you guys. All right, so what you find is that over 90% of the serious injuries in any given room full of people, that wasn't initiated by the equipment doing something unexpectedly or the other guy. So in the self area, and if you sort of ask people to think about their minor injuries, like the cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes, and you think about, something like banging your shin or stubbing your toe, how many times did the coffee table do something unexpectedly? How many times when you cut yourself with a razor or a knife in the kitchen did somebody actually bump into you? So what you'll find is that if you add up total accidental acute injuries, somewhere between 97 and 99% of the time, it wasn't the equipment and it wasn't the other guy, it was us. So in the self area, by the way, that's consistent with what the British Safety Council says about auto accident causation. 95% is driver error. It's not mechanical failure of the car or road conditions. And this is interesting. It's a bit higher in Canada and the United States, but we have a lot more bad winter weather than they do in the United Kingdom. So in the self area, can you think of a time you've been hurt when you were actually looking at what you were doing? You were thinking about what you were doing. You were aware of the line of fire or what could be coming at you, and you were at least conscious of losing your balance, traction, or grip. Now, can you think of a time in the self area you've been hurt when you weren't rushing, you weren't frustrated, or you weren't overly tired? Now, before I ask about complacency, it's a difficult word for folks where their native language is English, but in Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian, it's not a neutral term. It means excessive or foolish confidence. But everybody understands the concepts. You first start doing something like riding your bike, it takes 100% of your concentration just to balance on the bike, and if you're like me, you probably fell a couple of times. But after a while, you get the hang of it, and you'll come to this first stage of complacency where the fear or the skill is no longer preoccupying, which means your mind can wander. But what's really interesting about this is you don't give your mind permission to wander. It happens without your permission. It's not like any of us were driving for a couple years and we said, you know what, I got this, so now I can think about something else or drive on autopilot if I want. We all started driving on autopilot if the road was familiar without making a conscious decision to do it. Now, you go along a little further in time and you get to where most of us are with the car. If you've been driving for at least 10 years, you don't get in the car scared. But you nearly get hit by a big transport truck killing you. Now you're thinking about the risk. But it required that external stimulus. There's no more internal stimulus or fear. And when you get to that second stage of complacency, it can really start to affect people's decision making. So let me know if you've heard this at least once in your career. Oh yeah, well I've been doing it this way for 20 years and I've never been hurt yet. How many of you have heard that at least once? Now you get all the hands up. Okay. So the reason you can't stop your mind from wandering is because it gets filtered out, if it's familiar, by a part of your brain called the reticular activation system, and its whole job is to filter out noise in the environment. Literally, the noise of the birds in the trees, so your ancestors could hear the rustle in the grass, know that was a snake, and get out of the line of fire. And every one of our ancestors successfully procreated, or we wouldn't be here. So you can't stop complacency from leading to mind not on task. It's not a character flaw, it's just the way your brain is hardwired. You go to the swimming pool, you smell the chlorine. 30 minutes later, you don't smell the chlorine. Did the chlorine go away? No, you look at the little kids, they've been there 2 hours, their eyes are like bloodshot red. The chlorine's still there. And it won't matter how hard you try to smell the chlorine, you won't be able to do it because it's getting filtered out by your reticular activation system. But if your eyes also go with it, in other words, you're not thinking about what you're doing and you're not looking at what you're doing, in that moment, you won't get the benefit of your reflexes. So just think for a second about how many times have your reflexes saved your life or somebody else's? How many times has a pedestrian or a two-wheel come out in front of you and you had to hit the brake? If you didn't see them, would they be here? How many times have you had to swerve to miss getting hit by a big transport truck? If you weren't paying attention at that moment, would you be here? Or like the guy who fell 5 feet, didn't have time to get a hand down and hit his head, right? Even just standing up in the kitchen, hitting an open cupboard door. If you see it at the last second, maybe it's just a little scrape. If you don't see it, now it's stitches, right? So we rely, like I said, almost totally on our eyes and our minds and our reflexes for self-defense. And when you don't see it and you're not thinking about it, you don't get the benefit of your reflexes. So now that you know a little bit more about complacency, can you think of a time you've been hurt in the self area where you weren't rushing, you weren't frustrated, you weren't overly tired, and you hadn't become so complacent with the hazards that you just weren't thinking about them at that instant? So, what you find 97 to 99% of the time is that it's one or more of those 4 states causing or contributing to one or more of those 4 critical errors. That doesn't mean you're going to get hurt. It just means you've increased the risk of getting hurt if you're moving or things around you are moving. Now, a lot of people like to visualize it like this. You take normal risk. If one or more of the 4 states causes one or more of the 4 errors, you end up with increased risk. And 21 years ago, when I started talking about these concepts in Canada and the United States, people at safety conferences would be writing things down in the feedback sheets like he should never be allowed to speak at a safety conference again because he's just blaming the worker. Do you blame your kids for drowning when you get them swimming lessons? I mean, maybe there should have been a guardrail. Maybe the child should have had a life jacket on. But if your kid could swim, your kid would still be alive. So there's a huge difference between help and blame. The help is proactive, the blame is reactive. And you don't blame your kids for drowning, you're just proactively trying to keep them from drowning if they happen to fall in the water. But one of the other reasons it's hypocritical is because if you think about it, we have had stuff at the front end in terms of fail-safe to keep the people from even being able to experience the risk in the first place. Interlock, so if you go in the cage, the robots stop. Lockout, tagout is a perfect example of fail-safe. Even if somebody hits the start button by mistake, nothing can move because it's all locked out. I mean, we even have car keys now where you have to lock the car with the keys. So you can't lock the keys inside the car. Although I did get pretty good with the coat hanger back in the day. Now, we've also had stuff at the back end for years and years. Like the seatbelt. Nobody ever said the seatbelt prevented a car crash in the first place, but it did a pretty good job of keeping you from flying through the windshield and breaking your neck. And nobody ever said that the fall arrest harness stopped anybody from losing their balance, traction, or grip in the first place, but it did a pretty good job of keeping people from falling to their death. But it wasn't enough. No, I don't know if you saw it, but she hit her head on the way down. I thought it was funny at first, and then when I saw this, I went, wow, maybe that's another serious injury right there. So I'm not saying that the cell phone caused all of the problems in the world. We had problems before the cell phone, but how many of you would agree that this thing did not make things any better? Yeah. So, especially with the younger generation. So like I said, we had stuff at the front end, we had stuff at the back end, but we didn't have anything to help the people from making the mistake or the critical error in the first place. And sometimes there isn't stuff at the front end or the back end. But the key here, you guys, is the pattern. The states come before the errors, so you can use the active states, the rushing, frustration, fatigue, as triggers to keep yourself from making a critical error. So as soon as you realize you're in a rush or you're frustrated or you're tired, instead of thinking about why you're rushing or what's going to happen if you're late, you want that first thought to be eyes, mind, line of fire, balance, traction, grip. If you were going to teach this stuff to your children and they're running to school and they're worried about being late, and is the teacher going to send me down to the principal's office? Am I going to get a detention? No. You've got to teach them that that first thought has got to be eyes, mind, line of fire, balance, traction, grip. Then you can think about what you're going to tell the teacher. You get hit by a car on your way to school, you're not going to have to worry about school today, and maybe not tomorrow either. And twice as many children die accidentally as workers every year. Now, it'd be great if you could self-trigger on complacency, but complacency is a passive state. It leads to mind not on task, like I said before. So if you're not thinking about what you're doing, your behavior will be what you do normally or automatically or habitually. So there are 5 habits here to improve eyes on task. Which one of those 5 would have helped this lady? Just need 4 more minutes. Okay, which of those 5 would have helped this lady? Or which would have helped her the most? Yeah, number 3, moved her eyes first, okay? Now, but that's just her, right? You're talking about mechanics who are forever sticking their hands into things. Maybe they would pick number 2. People at construction sites tend to pick this one here because there's lots of stuff around. People on motorcycles or two-wheelers tend to pick this one. So we don't tell the adults what to do. We let them pick which one would help them the most when we're doing the training. So getting people to put a bit of effort into their safety-related habits helps to compensate for complacency leading to mind not on task. So we got to get people to put a bit of effort or a bit of work into their safety-related habits. But if you add enough rushing or frustration to this situation, the adrenaline, the cortisol, the adenosine, those chemicals will hijack your brain right down to the subcortex, or what you may have heard referred to as the reptile brain or the lizard brain. Now that part of our brain has been around for 250 million years old. It helped us survive in terms of fight or flight. But this is not the part of your brain you want to use when you're thinking, should I marry this girl? Now, I don't know if you've seen the 24-hour wedding chapels in Las Vegas, and I don't know if you can see this part here. They have a drive-up window like McDonald's. So how long do you figure those marriages are going to last? Not likely as long as the ones in India, I'll tell you that. So, when I said the first critical, it's also the most important critical error reduction technique, learning how to self-trigger, because even if you've got good safety-related habits, the rushing and the frustration can hijack your brain right down to the subcortex. Now, it would also be great if we could help people pull their mind back into the moment. So every time you see one of these state-to-air risk patterns, it will make your RAS light up. You'll think about risk, and you'll think about the risk for yourself in the moment. But it's got to be different. So I love showing this clip here in India. See if you guys light up when you see this. Because I saw this in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I am freaking out. I'm going, you have got to be kidding me. I mean, watching these motorcycles riding between these trucks down the center line is not something that you are going to see in Canada. But this is business as usual in India, and Manila, and Mexico City. So in order for this technique to work, it's got to be different. Now, hopefully you don't see something like that every day. And even if you weren't in the best habits of three-point contact or holding the handrail, you saw something like this, you'd probably be paying pretty good attention, eyes and mind on task as you're walking down the stairs. So the reason self-triggering works is you're not always in a rush, you're not always frustrated, you're not always tired, it doesn't get filtered out by your RAS, and you get to use your prefrontal cortex. And then the last technique is we want people to actually be able to learn from their mistakes. So every time you bump, bang, scrape into something or momentarily lose your balance, we want you to think, okay, was this a state like rushing, frustration, or fatigue that I didn't self-trigger on quickly enough? Or if it was mostly complacency leading to mind not on task, then it's probably a safety-related habit that still needs more work. And the other thing we want people to do is contemplate how it could have been worse, because if they start contemplating the worst-case scenario, then neural pathways are formed in their brain, and they don't actually have to have the real experience. You hear a story about somebody who cut these 3 fingers off, how painful it was, how they had to learn how to write with just these 2 fingers, how they're always trying to make it look like they got their hand in their pocket because they feel really awkward and embarrassed about it. It starts building those neural pathways in your brain. And those pathways eventually, if they become strong enough, will start associating the states and the critical errors with danger. Now, when you watch a movie in Hollywood, or Bollywood here, you know that something bad's going to happen because the music changes. And you're like, don't go around the corner, the guy's got a gun, he's going to shoot you, and the guy, bang! And you're like, oh, you stupid idiot, you didn't listen to the music. Well, in the real world, there is no music, right? So we've got to train people's subconscious, because you've got to be able to get this at reflex speed. So tell me, what's 3 times 4? Real quick. 12, exactly. When was the last time somebody asked you that? I mean, but you got it right away, right? Okay, now, 13 times 14? Yeah, okay. 13 times 13 is 169. Plus 12, 182. We can do it, right? And in that time, you just died in your car or you just fell down. That fast, it's got to be. If we want a reflex, it's got to be like 3 times 4, okay? So training your subconscious is like walking over the grass. 1 or 2 people walk over the grass, not much of a path. 300 or 400 people walk over it, the path gets wider and faster, we get reflex speed. So we've had stuff at the front end, we've had stuff at the back end. At least now we've got the critical error reduction techniques. You still want to look for fail-safe opportunities whenever you can, but you don't need 2 guardrails. And you also want to look for redundancy opportunities whenever you can, but you don't need 2 life jackets, and you certainly don't need to put 2 hard hats on the people. So it's really about teaching people the critical error reduction techniques well enough so they can use them at reflex speed. And if we do this, we can take a big bite out of the injuries that are initiated in the self area, which is 97 to 99% of them. We can help people prevent making those 2 first critical errors at the same time so that they don't get the benefit of their reflexes, and for that moment, they are defenseless. And this is the title of my new book. We have enough copies here for every one of you if you'd like to get one of them signed. Each chapter is based on an article that is coming out in safety magazines currently in the United States, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Brazil, England, Ireland, got the cover in Ireland. Russia is coming out this week, and we are also going to get starting published in February in Industrial Safety Review here in India, and they're going to put me on the cover in July. So I would love to give a book to every one of you if you'd care for one, and I'd also like to thank you very much for your time and for your attention and being willing to put your hands up when I went through the numbers. So thank you very much, everyone.